MSSP. What does that stand for? Mobility, stability, strength, and power. This is the order of operations that we want to follow when we're looking at doing a fitness routine or engaging in exercise activity. First, we must possess the proper mobility before we start throwing a bunch of weights overhead and doing crazy strength and power movements. This is something that is rampant in the fitness community today, where people dive right in and they're going immediately for strength training and power movements. And that's not to say that you have to absolutely master mobility and stability before you can play around with some of these more advanced movements, but it is important to make sure that your body has the appropriate mobility to do the given movement that you want to do. A good example of this would be a deadlift. A deadlift requires that you have good hip mobility so that you can hip hinge properly without rounding in your spine, especially under load. And if you're new to exercise, this is especially important that you try to maintain proper form with your exercises. If your training age is more advanced, meaning you have been training with weights regularly for a long time, you can start to play around with adding load and doing more untraditional movements, but this is something that is not typically recommended for beginners. So in the beginning, it's always a good idea to focus your efforts on mobility and then stability. Stability is going to come from core activation. It's going to come from core strength. It comes from learning which muscles to activate and when, so that your body is strong and secure as you lift heavier and heavier weights, or as you engage in power type movements such as a kettlebell swing, especially if it's a heavy kettlebell. So just remember MSSP, mobility, stability, strength, and power, and aim to work on all of these things. Even if you're an advanced athlete, it's never a bad idea to go back and revisit mobility work and stability work. In my opinion, mobility is something that we constantly need to stay on top of. With the amount of time that we sit down either at our desk jobs or sitting in cars, we don't really live in such a natural environment anymore where we're using our bodies in these different ways throughout the day that would maintain our mobility. So mobility is something we constantly need to stay on top of, and stability as well. It's always a good idea to revisit core isolation exercises and make sure that you can activate certain muscle groups so that when you move into strength and power, you're utilizing all of the muscles that you have and you're utilizing them properly. A good example of this is the kettlebell swing. The kettlebell swing is a power movement, and to do this power movement efficiently and reduce the risk of injury, it's important to have the mobility, the stability, and the strength there before attempting to do this power movement, especially with a heavy weight. Oftentimes what you'll see if a person is trying to do a kettlebell swing, but they haven't necessarily gone through the MSSP steps, is that there will be a lot of movement through the torso. There will be instability in the spine. They may not be able to maintain the same position of the spine or a neutral spine as they go into the backswing. You might also see an inability to maintain lat engagement as they are moving through the kettlebell swing if they don't have the stability and strength prior to working on this power movement. And one of the things you might see if they lack hip or hamstring mobility is that they'll get a rounding of the spine or will have an inability to perform the backswing properly, and they might end up squatting the kettlebell instead of hip hinging and hiking the kettlebell through the legs. So this is just an example of where a person may have skipped over the necessary steps to perform a kettlebell swing with good form. So it's always a good idea to go back, check in and see if you have the mobility that you need to do the movement. Make sure your core is functioning optimally, that you're not experiencing gut inflammation that could be shutting down these essential muscles, and that you have the strength to perform the movement with the weight that you're using.